the personal aspect of the film, because it's a film about Southern traditions moving north, and folklore and myth. So what, how did the story come about, and why was it so personal for you?
Well, this isn't autobiographical, but my family was like a working class and so forth. But they were all from Vicksburg, Mississippi, and my mother. I think my mic is.
Maybe bring it up a little.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
And thank you.
Good. No, my family was from Mississippi, Vicksburg, Mississippi, but I grew up in Los Angeles. But around where we lived, everyone was from the South. It was rare when you hear someone that they were born in Los Angeles or born in California. It was a surprise. Because it was so Southern culturally in where I lived. And my grandmother was very religious. And I used to play a trumpet, but that's as far as autobiographical in a sense. But my mother liked to play these old '78 records, blues and things like that. And so my grandmother just was cringed because she thought it was sinful. It was always this argument about religion and things like that, and blues and music and so forth. And I thought I was going to be a Louis Armstrong or something like that, or Miles Davis. So most of the kids in my neighborhood played instruments and things, but there was a church on every corner, just about like a liquor store at every other corner. And so and so there was this concern about saving your soul and this kind of thing. And then there was it was right after the end of not the end of the civil rights movement, but a lot of us took part in the march. I didn't take part in marches or anything like that, but a lot of the people did, but we always felt that we had a responsibility to do something, to make it better, Anyway, but I wanted to sort of talk about the people I grew up with, and film gave me an opportunity to sort of talk about, how there was this concern about keeping, traditional values. And this conflict between people who wanted to do something more and become something more, not follow this old line of thinking. And I remember that younger people didn't want to do things that their parents did, so anyway, so it came from that, and the sort of arguments in the household we would find, and I wanted to dramatize that.
Thank you. And it's a very special person playing the trumpet in the film. Who did you cast to play the trumpet?
That's my son. That's my oldest son, Steve. He's like 6'5" or 6'7" now.
And you gave him one of the great cinema endings. So it's a very good father.
Yeah, well, I must say, the composer, Stephen James Taylor, he's done a number of films I've done, and he's really a great person, and he's very talented, and so he really helped the film a great deal.
Thank you. And you talked a moment ago about the values that inform your filmmaking, and since we are at UCLA, I think it would be a good moment to kind of share with the audience your coming of age as a filmmaker, as part of a group of amazing people, in what came to be known as the LA Rebellion. In the 80s, I think that term was given to a lot of the work that you and your colleagues were doing. But what were the values that were driving you as filmmakers at that time?
Well, we wanted to sort of find what is a black film, and so we spent most of the time here in the evenings, going to cafes here and closing cafes, because we spent hours there until they closed the place up, and anyway, we're trying to find out what should we be doing, how do we represent our people, how do we give them a voice, and so, but UCLA was very great. I mean, when we were here, it was very few people of color, and I mean, so there was this camaraderie, this need to have this association, and so we would spend, the early days here at UCLA and in the editing rooms and things like that. And then in the evening we'd go to different cafes or restaurants and argue with each other and lose friendship and then regain it. And we're very strong about what we believed in, you know, and where we're supposed to be going and doing. And so it came about that like that. And you know, it started with UCLA. They had this. First of all, let me say it was a great school. It is, and I really appreciate coming here and the teachers and everything. But you know, you learn film by working with other students, you know, and like TA-ship and things like that to student teachers. But we, I mean, one of the things, as I mentioned, that we were supposed to help each other, you know, and so everyone worked on every other person's film, and it was, you know, trying to find what was our voice, particularly after, you know, you see Birth of a Nation. I'm sure most of you who are in film seen Birth of a Nation. That was a really outrageous film, you know, and it really set the example of who we are as people. It just really distorted who we are, you know, because Reconstruction, the period after the Civil War, is one of the most progressive periods in American history, you know, and then Andrew Johnson, I think it was Abraham Lincoln's vice president at the time, tried to destroy everything that was progressive, and then you see, because of that film, you know, Hollywood never got off of this image of who we are. They kept repeating this terrible image of, you know, people who built public schools, you know, for black people and things like that, and had banks and so forth, and so anyway, we, you know, and that was considered an art film, you know, a major film. And I think it was Woodrow Wilson who said that Birth of a Nation was, what's that expression, was written.
History written with lightning.
Yeah, it's a great expression, but God, you know. anyway, so that's where I, you know, where it came from. And I think Clyde Taylor, who first brought up the term of LA Rebellion, because we were sort of, I think, we were sort of angry about what Hollywood was doing, so we rejected a lot of that stuff. And when Hollywood screened their films in Melnick's Hall, I mean, there were a lot of us who just, you know, just attacked, you know, until the faculty said, look, if you guys keep insulting the studio people coming, you know, and showing their film, we're going to stop, you know. And so, but that didn't stop us. But anyway, so that's basically.
Thank you. And, you know, this sense of community spirit and togetherness is very apparent in all of your films, both as a theme within the film, but how the films come together. And at the start of the introduction tonight, you mentioned Danny Glover and his pivotal role in making this film a reality, because it was a real group effort to get To Sleep With Anger off the ground. In addition to giving such an amazing performance, he was really central to helping the film get funded, and it would be great to hear you speak about Danny's role.
Well, first of all, let me say he's really a great person in many ways, a great humanitarian, and he speaks to a lot of issues that should, you know, should be brought out. You know, he's not like these people who are afraid to say what should be said. You know, but he's always helping to speak at certain functions and things like that. We're very progressive. But anyway, I mean, we had. Trying to think how we started. I remember I wrote the script. Oh, I know what it was. I'm sorry. It's because it's been so long ago. I had tried to develop the film at a public broadcast station. I was Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and they invited me to submit a film, a proposal, an idea. I did, and they would pay you on a basis of a quarter, like what you did, and if they liked what you did, they would send you a check. If they didn't, they'll tell you, well, and you call in and you ask, well, where's the check? And they say, well, it's upstairs. and every time if they didn't like it, they always say, well, the check is upstairs. And you say, well, can't you go up and get it or something like that? And because you're really dependent on it. Anyway, so they kept wanting to make changes in the script, and I just couldn't do it anymore. I said, it's not that kind of a film. you know. And so we decided to part company. And then they wrote me this awful letter saying that you'll never be a writer, you'll never be a filmmaker, and all that sort of thing. And I remember asking, I said, there was a scene where, you know, that's in a picture where they're talking about the past or something like that. And Horton Foote did a movie wrote a story for PBS, Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and I quoted that. I said, well, they were talking about how my story about the past didn't work. So I said, well, Horton Foote just did a movie for you guys, and you did that, you know. And they said, well, you're not a Horton Foote, you know, and you're never going to be a writer. And I say this because I'll jump to a date not too long ago, that I got this call from, I was in Africa working on a film about the liberation of Namibia. And I got a call from the States, and they said, well, this is, we want to give you an award, a prize. I said, fine. They said, but you have to be here. I said, well, I can't. I'm in Africa now, and it takes 14 hours to do all this flying back and forth and so forth. And they said, no, but you have to be here. I said, well, can't someone else? No, you have to be here to get it. Okay. So I was getting pretty upset because, you know, flying back and, you know, working on this film to America, 14 hours, and they seemed like they were not considering, you know, how difficult it was. And so I was about to say, well, I'm sorry I can't make it. Then I asked, well, what is the award you want? And he said, well, it's a Horton Foote Writing Award. and I said, I'll be right there. I got to the function, you know, I told them the whole history of it, how it is and everything, you know, and everything. Anyway, so that was sort of poetic justice.
But yeah, I just want to, that's a great story. And Horton Foote did what? Did he write Tender Mercies?
Oh no, Horton Foote?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't remember what it was, but it was some family drama.
This, but, yeah.
It was some family drama. They were sitting on the porch talking about the past, you know.
You got your award. That's the main thing. But yeah, just back to Danny and his involvement.
Oh, Danny. Yeah. Well, we were taking the film around, the script around to every place, you know. There was always some problem with the script, you know, and they couldn't understand what it's about and things like that. And so they didn't even have a name for it. They just like it was I don't know, a blank sheet of paper or something. They just didn't, you know. And then when we got Danny Glover attached to it, then they call it a script. You know, it was like it was Danny's. Danny had just did Lethal Weapon. Yeah, and was doing great. And he was gracious enough. First, we gave him the script to play one of the parts with the brothers, and but he read the script and he said, you know, I would do what you want me to do, but I really like the role of Harry. Mm-hmm. I said, you can play any role you want. Whatever you like, you can talk about it, you know. And he was gracious enough to put his name to it, and then that's when it became, people got interested in it, you know. So.
Thank you. I'll ask one more question, and then I'll come out to the audience. This is like a selfish question because I just love the opening shot so much with Paul Butler and the flames, and that was, if I'm not mistaken, the first real venture in your work into a sort of magical, realist, supernatural kind of vibe. And I just would love to hear you talk about the opening scene of the film and what inspired it.
Well, I used to listen to, like, sister was at a Thorpe, and I always wanted to, my mother had all these old 78 blues records and things and religious records and things, and I used to play them all the time, but I always wanted to, like, archive them in a sense, put them in something that would preserve them, because I had this particular scene and record that I wanted to match them with. But those 78s are very, very brittle. You have to be very careful with them. And I broke it. And I couldn't find, I looked all over for these old old record shops and things like that. Couldn't get one, but Dennis Doro and Amy found, after I finished the film, and then they sent it to me, but it's couldn't put it on then. Anyway, and so I always wanted to. I remember I was walking down the street one day. This was years later after I was sort of older and walking down the street. I was humming this tune that I didn't know where it came from, and I started looking for it, and I realized it came from these old '78 records, and so I wanted to make a film to put them in it, the film. And so that was one of the reasons to make the film, because of the songs, and they had these stories, built into them. And so when I thought of images, it came from looking at listening to these 78s.
Thank you. And the music and the sounds of the film just all come together to help make it so atmospheric. And so, we'll go to the audience now. Do we have a mic, or is it just going to be a shout-out kind of situation?
We have mics for students.
Say again?
We do have mics.
Okay, great. I'm looking for hands. Any questions? Yeah, right in the blue shirt in here.
Do I need a mic? Or can
Yeah,
you hear
the
me?
mic's coming for you.
Okay.
Or coming to you, that sounded menacing.
Hello?
Is it on? Oh, there we go. Okay. Your movie, my first time seeing it, it does such a good job of highlighting the tension between right and wrong, good and evil, and this, this I want to be good, but then, playing with the fire over here and getting tempted. And I'm wondering, since you grew up in that neighborhood with, obviously those kind of tensions were from the South, but now in LA probably heightened because of the closeness of the society and living together. How old were you when you first noticed those tensions? Because I'm assuming you're the kid with the horn type of guy running around the neighborhood with your friends, and at some point you start noticing this tension, which is a very strong part of the movie. At least that's what I saw.
I don't. I think it's a part of you, but you don't realize. I try to put it in some sort of form and take when I got into filmmaking. Then I was looking around to find something that had some sort of conflict in it, some sort of moral conflict and something like that, and because it was one of these kind of things where we always criticize people who were successful and left the community, like ball players and things like that, athletes and so forth. It's like and it made you realize that that there's something really missing, and because there was this conflict between middle class and poor in my neighborhood when I was coming up, and so and the people that you really, it was a very subtle thing, very subtle indoctrination in a certain sense, because one of the things that I wanted to do was to point out people who were very, very important in growing up, like older people who didn't have much of, not, I guess not really gone to college and things like this. A lot of them did, but one of the things that I was always impressed by, older men who didn't know you personally, but they had this general thing of trying to help young people, and they would tell you, boy, stay in school, and that became such an important song, not song, but the interest that they gave you, like, boy, stay in school. And I think that was one of the things that made me look at the people, the men and women in my neighborhood who sacrificed a great deal, and so I wanted to honor them in a certain sense. But when I was playing my trumpet and things like that, and trying to decide if I want to be a blues player or whatever it was, it was there that this having to make a choice, and it was like a moral decision, whatever it is. You play the blues, it's the devil's music and things like that, you know. So that was a very strong impression that was left on me, you know, until, you know, it sort of made you wonder, well, maybe I shouldn't be trying to get into music and things like that, you know, because, you know, those things when you're young, it sort of, you believe everything. You know, I used to believe, not that I was going to ever be a president, seriously, but I used to think that I would never be, because, you know, George Washington never told a lie. You couldn't be a president because you know, those things. Now it's like the way to get in to be a president. $1 trillion, but no, seriously, you know, you're like, you know, because the church was right down the street, and had a church on my block down the street, and you know, every Sunday, you know, you had to go to Sunday school or go to church, and if you know, and you couldn't go to the movies if you hadn't gone to church, you know, and so it was that kind of a strict kind of a thing, you know, and so there was a lot of conflict and a lot of trying to figure out what life was about, you know. But I've always admired how there were some people who were very strong and how they look at life in a religious way, and so I had, you know, I used to. I mean, one of the things that I think my kids jump on me because they were kind of like materialistic, you know, and they would say, "Why do you make these movies that don't make any money?" You know, and I'm saying, "What are you doing?" You know, and so it's like, I don't know, it's one of those kind of things, and to the point where when I started making films, I didn't care too much about money, which I should have, you know, because you know later you have to pay all these bills and stuff like that, and tuition and all this kind of stuff, and but it was because I had a grandmother who always used to say money is evil and things like that, and I sort of believed that. So I was really not very good at thinking in terms of money. You know, I remember going to when I was in junior college. This guy I knew who was so surprising, and he said to me that his goal was to make $1 million before he was 21, you know, and I should have stuck with him. I was thinking about that, you know. I'm sorry, I'm getting off on it wrong, man. Anyway.
That was a great question. And we'll come to you with the hand up. Thank you. So we're kind of checks upstairs kind of thing. Thank you.
So you didn't make this for a lot of money, but you put a lot of very important, talented actors in this movie. Now that it's made, and it's, I don't know, 400 years since. How do you feel about having all those actors in your movie?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. I say this because, I mean, and I had a good casting agent, which told me something. She said, listen to, you may have opinions about them from whatever, TV and all that sort of thing, but listen to them. Give everyone, when everyone comes in, you know, listen to them and give them a chance. And one of the things that, you know, I got a lot of older actors in there that every time they would read a part, and I always say, where were you? Where have you been? You know, some dumb question. I knew the answer, but I just couldn't, you know, believe that here all this talent, and it was like a raisin in the sun, you know, in a sense. And every time the one would come in and read, I would always say the same thing. How come we haven't seen you? And it almost made you cry because these were talented people at the end of life, so to speak, and they're very, you know, up there. And it just shows you what segregation would do, and the attitudes of racism and things like that. Because these guys were great, and I always wanted to work. In fact, Julius Harris, who played the older guy with the cane.
Oh, Julius Harris.
Yeah. In fact, he was the one I wanted to play, to play Harry, and And the guy that played Okra was another one. And just all of them were just wonderful to work with. I learned a lot from Mary Alice, you know. And, well, I'll show you how naive I was in terms of working with actors, really good actors. And I worked with, before, friends of mine. And you sort of typecast, you know, with that. And we used to work every Sunday and Saturday and Sunday to make Killer Sheep. And so, you know, you just almost saying, just be yourself, you know. But then when you work with real actors, then you know what acting is about, you know. And you can just make these adjustments and it can, you know, just accommodate you. And I remember, and there's one scene in the kitchen with Mary Alice, and I had never worked with professional actors like that before, so it was a learning experience for me. And so when she was coming into the kitchen from the dining room or something, and she said, asked me, well, where am I coming from? What was I doing? And I'm like, you're just coming from the kitchen. And coming from the kitchen. That's it, you know. And like, but she wanted something more, like her attitude, you know, and everything. And it didn't dawn on me until after. Oh, I'm sorry. It didn't dawn on me until after. When she walked in, then I realized what she was talking about, you know. But like I was smart enough not to say anything, you know. But I just learned from these actors who, you know, showed me and taught me so much, you know, at that moment. And anyway.
It's one of the things that makes the film so quietly revolutionary, because you have so many great roles for these actors who've not had those opportunities. And it's just a film about black family life, right? And it's complicated and nuanced and not extremely straightforward. And I just wish there were more, you know, but you've done something so special to that's why I'm so grateful. You know, this film it stands out because of the opportunities that you've given the cast to tell those stories. Wow, loads of, I should stop there. I'm gonna go to you in the beige cardigan, and then I'll come over to this side.
I was just, you know, all of us are prospective filmmakers, even if it's a short or a full-fledged film. But I was wondering, if you have that motivation, where did you start? And how did you decide that you wanted to be a filmmaker? When did you decide? And what action did you take?
Well, it's strange because I always wanted to do something in still photography, because I used to work in the library and I used to read all these journals and things like that, and look at it, you know, these old black and white photographs by really great photographers, but I never had the money to take a camera or take it and take photography. But I always wanted to do something for some reason, do something in film. I used to live right near the airport, under the gliding path, the LAX. And so these airplanes would fly over really low. And I used to work this car wash in Inglewood. And this guy had this regular 8 camera. And he let me shoot this, I should say film this airline, you know, flying over, you know. And that was the first time. It was a regular 8 film. And I was in junior high school or something like that.
Oh, wow.
And so anyway, that was my first time. But I was majoring in electronics, so I was, the thing I thought I was going to be that and play a trumpet or whatever it is. But I've always had this connection, but I never followed through on it until when I got tired of, got disenchanted with electronics. I was on the LACC, and I took this creative writing class with this lady by the name of Isabel Ziegler, and she was great. I mean, we these other students just, it was very diverse, and a lot of us audited for 2 semesters or 3 semesters, you know.
Wow.
And I never thought about writing or anything like that before, because I used to raise pigeons, and so the only thing I read was pigeon magazines, you know. And I don't know, I spent so much money on those doggone things. Like you buy a pair showbirds for $500 a pair, and I had a paper route. You know, they said, how do you? I mean, I look at the money I spent on those birds. I wonder, what was I thinking? But anyway, they were pleasant. They were fun to look at. Anyway. Anyway, what am I talking about now?
I think that's a great answer. We learned a lot there. I want to make sure that we have up there. Yeah, you.
Oh, wait.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
First of all, thank you so much for not making millions of dollars, because my generation of filmmakers really look to you to teach us how to make art films about us. So thank you. And we get to look to you for inspiration, and your generation of filmmakers, who did you look to help you formulate your vision and help you as you were developing that question of what does it mean to make Black films?
I mean, there are a lot of great films that, I could list that really moved me. And there was a lot of good older Hollywood films I really liked too. But I came up doing when they had these new waves at different countries, and there were things like, the Bicycle Thief, Sachi Ray and stuff, and you name it, a lot of documentary, and yours Evans, who did Song of Something, he did Story of the Wind, Zyder Z, Zodi Z, whatever it's called, Zyder Z, and I looked at him as well, and I was very fortunate enough to take, that did,
Basil Wright.
Basil Wright, yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah, Basil Wright. And in fact, he was the one UCLA had this, I have to put my hands over here, my eyes, because the lights just can't see anything. UCLA used to show the best of the student films in the Royce Hall screenings. And I used to go to those things, and I would come out really, no, not inspired, but traumatized. No. First of all, I don't mean to say that the films are bad, anything like that. They were really good films, but the stories were something I couldn't relate to, because at the time it was like flower children, nudity and all that kind of stuff. And I couldn't understand. I was, where I came from, it was something more important to deal with, and so. I was taking Basil Wright's class, the history documentary, and so I just went to him and I told him what problems I had, seeing these films at Royce Hall, and he was like, I can't paraphrase what he said so much, but I can tell you what it meant to me. That he was telling me, look, in a sense, don't worry about that. Just the thing to do is to honor your subject and be true to and do your film, And he said a bunch of other things that made a lot of sense, And so it's something sort of like the light came on, and I said, that's what I should be doing, And he was showing how he made his film, Song of Salon, about rubber plantations, how they exploited people, but he was using their money to criticize them, in a sense, and so he just said what I should be doing, and that made a lot of sense at the time. So I owe him a big debt for that. Yeah.
Thank you for the great answer and the great question. Now, with apologies to everyone who wants to ask great questions, I have time for one more, and I'm going to go to you on the end. Yeah. And if we could get a mic as well, that would be great. It's coming down the line to you. And I'm sorry to everyone who didn't get a chance to answer, but the questions have been really great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you so much for the beautiful film. I have a question about the agriculture in the film. I noticed there was such an importance, and like you showcased a lot of chicken and people having self-sustaining ways of agriculture. There was a bouquet of kale or some spinach, I forget what it was. But I think that is so interesting juxtaposed to kind of Los Angeles and it being like a place for consumerism. So you created or showcased communities kind of growing and sharing food amongst each other. Was that intentional or was that genuinely how you grew up? Because that's important for me to kind of figure out.
I think I've heard. I don't know if I heard you all of what you said, but I think you're making reference to the sort of chickens in the yard and things like that. And
The question was about agriculture and the community looking after each other, growing things, growing food, and the bouquet of greens, the kale, juxtaposed against the consumerist side of LA, and whether that was a comment from you or whether that was really how you grew up.
Well, yeah, we had, and we lived on the corner of 99th and Town, right under the right past the airport. And we had rabbits, chickens, pigeons, turkeys, ducks. We had all those things you can have in there because LA was still under development in a sense, And because beyond like 115th, it was pretty much until you got to Compton, it was open. It feels like, and people had horses and stuff like that, And, yeah, we had. I mean, because my grandmother, they came from the South and they sort of grew their own food and things like that, And so that was, growing up with animals was, everyone had a dog or something, and they had chickens. We had, we were some probably bad kids, We had chicken fights and all that kind of junk. We did everything, And but it was really really great. And one of the things about the people in the community I really respected and got a lot from was that if you had a dinner or something like that and you invite your friends over and one of the things too was like the older people, like you would set a plate and they'll come in, whatever it is, come by, and you would always offer them something, and your mother, said, well, have a plate, sit down and whatever. And they would always say something like, let the kids eat first, And I always thought that was such a very humane thing to be considerate, considering, what's important, And so those lessons like that, there was a whole lot of things like that. And then we had, like people playing guitars and things like that on the porch and telling all these stories about Mississippi and things. And it created this sort of magical, real sense of the past, And so I always looked at the South and Vicksburg, sort of a visual way because of that, And then what happened was, the thing that really shocked the heck out of me and everything, where I stopped being a kid in a sense, when Emmett Till was killed. And they had, the magazine, Jet magazine, with his body on there. And that was, I kind of stopped believing a lot of things, at that point. But many of the kids in the neighborhood did, And so that was, I think, a turning point. And one of the things why I wanted to do a film is because of that too, as well.
Well, listen, thank you everybody for being here, being such a great audience.
Yes,
Please
thank you.
give it up for Mr. Charles Burnett.
Thank you.